So you've booked the perfect guest and you know that they've got a fascinating story to share. But how do you make sure that on the day of the interview they bear all and you get the most out of your guest for your listeners? This week I'm joined by Christian Carrion, who hosts Tell Us About Yourself, where he interviews game show contestants and digs up interesting stories. He has a ton of advice around growing a niche podcast and getting the most out of guest interviews. And we cover how to grow a niche podcast, how to book dream guests, interview tips to get the most out of your guests, staying consistent with your podcast while working, and some fascinating and memorable stories that Christian has uncovered on his show. Christian's podcasting journey is really unique and it's worth hearing for any podcaster. So you interview game show contestants. I just wanted to ask, what's the most amount of money anyone's ever won out of people you've interviewed?
Right now, the record for contestant on my show with the most winnings is in the neighborhood of about $6.5 million. It was a guy who was on a show that only aired in California. It was part of their lottery. It was one of their lottery games called The Big Spin. And he won a jackpot that started at $6.5 million, became this local celebrity overnight, lost it all in the dot-com boom. It was quite a roller coaster to learn about.
Oh my God. Well, yeah, because here, like, we have Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, so it's £1 million, which is one of the biggest game shows we have. And did you know that before you got them on? Do you kind of look for guests who you know are going to have a really interesting story? Do you try and find these kind of celebrities then?
One of the things that I love about booking guests for the show is that any contestant with a story is an eligible guest. So I've talked to people who have been on a dozen shows and won nothing. In the meantime, I've talked to people like this man Eric that I'm talking about, who again won $6.5 million. I find my guests sometimes through reruns. I love game shows, so I'm watching them all the time. And sometimes I'm fascinated with the names that you get. You really only get a certain facet of that person's personality through the context of the show that they're on. And so I love being able to learn a little bit more about those people that you really only get a snapshot of. And that to me is what makes each guest kind of exciting in their own way, regardless of what they've won or lost. I mean, those are always interesting, but that's not a real criteria for me when it comes to booking guests.
And what's interesting about this is that I feel like we work with a lot of podcasters who do interview podcasts, and everyone they interview really have probably been on a few other podcasts, or it's just part of their marketing strategy. They guest on a new podcast every week. I imagine that a lot of your guests have never been on a podcast or don't do it that often.
Some of them have. There are contestants like my new friend Scott, who lives in Los Angeles. He's been on something like 36 shows. And so once you make a certain number of appearances, you sort of become known for being a game show person. And so they get requests to do interviews and, what's your secret? How do you get on shows? So some of them have, but I would say you're right. A large majority of them have never done anything like this before. And I like to think that the way that I go about recording them and the way that I go about interviewing them is conducive to the experience of somebody who's never done it before. I like to think it's a little more comfortable, a little more intimate. That's what I aim for.
Awesome. And just to give the listeners a little bit of background, so you're all in on this niche in a variety of ways. You've got your blog, you contribute to a national quiz as well, quiz event. Where does the podcast, and when did the podcast come into this? Was it always going to be that, or did you just sort of see podcasting growing and you wanted to add that as well?
This particular podcast is a sort of intersection of two interesting things that have happened in my life over the past 10 years. Buzzer Blog is the blog that is the sort of parent of the podcast, and that's been around since 2006. My buddy Corey, who lives in Baltimore, founded this website as a location to learn about news and casting as it related to game shows and reality TV, which reality was super popular back around the time Buzzer Blog became a thing. And I became the news editor in 2010. And so that's what I was doing on the side, writing about the type of TV that I love. As I had interesting experiences in that world, interviews, I would write about them. I would write about shows that I enjoy that aren't on the air anymore. And secondly, COVID was a huge catalyst in terms of my career as a podcaster. I work in luxury hospitality by day, and that was one of the industries that was hit hardest. I remember working at the hotel the day that it was announced that COVID was a pandemic, and the phone calls started flooding in to the point where we had to call people in to answer the phones. And I was sent home soon after that because there was no work. I'd always wanted to be a broadcaster. I've always wanted to be a game show host. That's just always been on my roadmap. And so, in this absence of work, I found an opportunity to do what I wanted to always do on my own terms. No boss, no notes. I can build it myself. And so I emptied out a closet in my apartment. I bought a bunch of soundproof foam on Amazon, and I bought a decent microphone, hung it up on the wall, and I put out a post on Reddit. And the post was one sentence. It said, "If you want to talk to me for as long as you want about anything you want, call me." And it was my phone number. And I just invited strangers from all over the world to call me. 90 episodes later, it was A Stranger Than Christian, which was the name of that initial podcast. I ended up with about 250,000 downloads. I've talked to people from every state, about 80 different countries, from all walks of life. And it was an incredible social experience because in the absence of that interpersonal communication that I was getting every day, that all of us were getting to some degree every day, not having that and realizing that I had this portal to anywhere else in the world, literally in my closet, was a game changer for me. About 2 years later, the National Archives of Game Show History, which is a part of the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, the largest toy and play centric museum in the world. They decided that they were going to build a physical space, and that's still a couple years off. But in the process of promoting this event, they contacted Buzzerblog and asked if there was anything we thought we could do to promote what they were doing, promote their blog posts, promote their opening date, once that comes. So in a Zoom meeting with me, Corey, the people in charge of the museum, the people in charge of the Game Show Archive, I just blurted out, "I do a podcast where I talk to complete strangers. I've been talking to people for 2 years. You should let me do my show, but talk to contestants." That seems to be a part of this that we're not really archiving right now. We're talking to the host and we're getting props and set pieces and building these exhibits, but contestants are a huge part of what makes a game show go. And just sat back and just let the idea sit for a minute. And they loved it. So that was November of 2022. We're going on 130 episodes now. And I'm having the time of my life.
Awesome. Yeah, and you say it started, the original one, which I didn't realise you had that one before, started during COVID, but you're still going, like a lot of these podcasts that did start during the COVID time. They're no longer podcasters because they've gone back to their full-time job, and podcasting is quite a lot of work, especially if you're consistent with it.
It absolutely is. And that is something that gave me great trepidation when it came time to go back to work. I worried that, is this hobby something that I'm maintaining because I have all this free time? Or is it something that's going to fall by the wayside the way, like you said, a lot of podcasts do that started in, April of 2020. They have a few episodes and they fade out because real life, starts back. Grateful to have realized the need for that discipline early on. The discipline to record and edit and release on a regular basis. And I should clarify as well that first podcast ended when I started this current one.
Yeah.
But even to keep it going years past, the original idea, I'm pretty proud of that for sure. And all the episodes are still available online.
And you still have your job in hospitality, is that right?
I do, yes. I'm a hotel manager.
So how does that work around everything else? Like, how do you stay consistent with the podcast? You've got to find, I'm presuming you're not getting someone else to find these guests, or do you have help in terms of editing and any of those aspects?
In terms of recording and editing, it's pretty much a one-man show. Corey will upload the episodes to all the services. As the show's gone on, I've gotten requests from people who say, "Hey, I know somebody who's been on a show. You should talk to them." So in that way, I get help booking guests, but more often than not, that's me as well. And, early on, I realized that if I want it to work, I'll figure out a way to make it work. You know what I mean? Like, if I make the time, then I'll have the time. And so thinking about having a full-time schedule, realizing in real terms how much time a session takes, how much time an interview takes, realizing that's an hour, it takes me an hour to record, an hour to edit. I think I can find those 2 hours in any of my free time to do it. And it was just it's a constant reminder to stay on it, because it's of course easier to not do it than to do it. But just remembering how important consistency is, especially when it comes to creating this kind of content. I think that in my experience, the podcasts that get promoted the most are the ones that release episodes week in, week out, or on some decent schedule, whether people are listening or not. That's for all of us. That's part of the challenge is overcoming that hump.
For sure. Even though you do have that job, the podcast is monetized to an extent, isn't it? You do have some supporters and some advertising there as well.
We do, yes. I have sponsorships. One of the sponsors being the Inn at Leola Village, the hotel that I work. That's not a plug, but that's one of my sponsors.
Yeah.
And we do the Patreon thing, which doesn't account for a ton of the monetization. I would say sponsorships are huge. And I'm very fortunate that I've found some local businesses and friends that decided to take a chance on my show. And I hope it's paid off for them. It's been about 3 years now that they've been sponsoring.
And I know that there's a fair few listeners who want to get to this place with their podcast. They want sponsors. They want to start making some of that money back, at least for the editing and stuff like that. How did you make that happen? Was it because, did it help that you obviously worked at the hotel? And then for the Patreon as well, when did you decide to do that? Because I know a lot of people think about doing that, but think, oh, no one's going to want to pay me to do this or whatever. Was there any part of that for you?
Yeah, it's tough for sure when it comes to deciding when to start asking for money for this thing. My wife is an artist, and that's also one of her pain points as well, deciding how much to charge for the thing that you make, which I think is a common problem among people who make things. And as I think about most of the opportunities I've received in my life come from me asking. This podcast came from me asking in the middle of a meeting if I could do it. And so as simple as it might sound, I just asked. I said, I'm thinking about starting a Patreon, would you consider supporting? When it came time to think about sponsorships, I emailed my boss. I emailed a couple of friends who have local businesses or who are looking to do similar, creative things. And I was real about it. I said, hey, I have this show. We have this many episodes, this many downloads. I'd love for you to be a sponsor. We'll give you a 30-second read at the top and bottom of the show for this much. How does that sound? I think I was more casual about it than a lot of other people might have been. I don't know if that's why it paid off. I don't know if it's because they believed in the show. I think that's part of it to a certain degree. But I just asked. The worst anyone could say is no. And honestly, that's a principle that has guided a lot of what I do in this space for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot less to lose, I think, than people think just by asking.
Definitely.
And did they have any criteria? So did they want you to have a certain amount of listeners, or is it more like a pay-per-click type thing? This is more of a flat rate. So I gave a number and I said, for this number, I will read out your ad at the top and bottom of every episode throughout the year. Yeah, I don't have much. I don't have much professional experience in podcasting other than this, so I didn't really know how to go about it in any other way other than to just a person talking to another person. Yeah, cool. No, thanks for that. I just wanted to touch on the monetization because, again, I know a lot of people want to get to that place, and hopefully it just encourages people, if they're thinking about it, just to give it a go and see what happens.
Sure. And I will say that consistency is important as well when it comes time to show a potential sponsor this thing that you're making. It helps to show them that you've been making it week in, week out, that you have some regularity, some structure to it. I think that's always more appealing. Whether you know the sponsor personally or not, I think that's always a more appealing pitch.
Definitely. Yeah, they don't want you to just disappear halfway through the year because you sort of ran out of steam. But right. I guess it also helps a lot with that consistency that this is something that you've been so interested in for many years before the podcast, rather than something you just feel like you have to do for your job or something.
Exactly. And I'm gonna tell you a secret that I don't usually talk about. I don't know if I've talked to too many other people about it. it's really hard to get a job in broadcasting, period. The job market is what it is right now, but especially in something as crowded and competitive as broadcasting, I never really found a foothold in it. That's what I went to school for. That's what I've always wanted to do. In hospitality, I found something that's adjacent in some ways in terms of communication, in terms of the type of broadcasting that I wanted to do, which is dealing with ordinary, everyday people. I get that at work. But the podcast, at its heart, is me silently building a nest over here on the side. If I can't go to broadcasting job and build a career that way, maybe I'll build it myself. Maybe this is something that I don't necessarily find in New York or Los Angeles. Maybe it's something I literally build in my closet. And so my entire life has been guided by this idea that if you don't have it or you can't get it, make it yourself. My dad is an artist, my wife is an artist, my brother is an artist. I come from a creative background. And so that's just always been something that's been in here. And that's the B plot. That's the strategy underneath. I'm grateful to have a day job and have a career in that way, but I'm silently building a body of work that I can be proud of, that is influenced by my creative taste. Again, there's nobody really influencing it other than me and the people that I choose to take influence from. So that's the goal. You know, if you don't have it, you can make it. And I think that podcasters, no matter what kind of podcast they do, I think that is hopefully if that's something that resonates.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And the barrier to entry has been lowered. The gatekeepers have been removed to a lot of these things these days with podcasting. That's why even celebrities and actual professional broadcasters who do have access to these opportunities, even some of them are now deciding to put a podcast together as an independent thing, just so they don't have to answer to anyone. So there's
definitely
over it.
It's a really exciting space to be in. Even a few years after the big boom post COVID, it's still really exciting to see what directions this media goes in. I mean, there are so many different applications for this type of skill, for this type of entertainment. And so I know I'm a very, very small niche, a very small kind of pocket of the universe. And so it's exciting to see what else is out there.
But it's still small though. Like, it's got a long way to go. I was just looking the other day. I think there are about 4 million or so podcasts out there, but only about 500,000 are active. And out of those 500,000, how many of them are interviewing game show contestants? Like, you're doing something.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm the only one. So yeah, I hope I'm doing something right.
Yeah, and I mean, the one caveat to that, if somebody does find a niche that they're the only one who's doing it, it might be because no one's interested. But obviously, you found the niche that people are interested in.
Yeah, I think so. I've received a lot of interesting opportunities as a result of doing this show. Actually, I'm flying out to Los Angeles next week to take part in a game show related project that I can't talk too much about. It's a documentary, nice. But I'm really excited for that, and that's something that came about because they found me and found my podcast and thought that I would be somebody interesting to speak to. And again, just thinking about those opportunities and reflecting on the fact that this is largely self-built. Super proud of it. I feel like I built my own house in a way.
Nice one. Cool. And then these listeners, who are they? Like, do you get to talk to your listeners much? Are they just people that are generally watch a lot of game shows, or are they people that have been involved in the industry?
The audience for the podcast is interesting because at its core, it's people who love game shows, right? And at this point, I think I know most of them. I know most of the game show fans, and in that way, the community is very vibrant. I'm always talking to the people that are listening. They're always talking to me. There's open dialogue there, whether that's on Facebook, on Discord. On the outside of that are people who enjoy. I think it's people who enjoy conversation. I got a comment once on the show that said, "I find this really pleasant to sleep to," which, to somebody looking to make entertainment, maybe on its face isn't a complaint, but I take pride in the fact that I'm creating something that is something that's comforting, something that provides comfort. That to me can be a goal of entertainment. It's not always it's not always fireworks and money falling from the sky. Sometimes it's comfort. It's stimulating conversation. So I think those people are kind of on the fringe. And then, dotted on the outside of that are these wild cards. Sometimes I'll get a call from somebody who produces television in Los Angeles, and it's a compliment on an episode that they heard. Sometimes it'll be somebody who isn't necessarily interested in doing a podcast, but has been on a bunch of shows, has that experience, has been doing it for years, and appreciates hearing that insight. It's really all over the place, but I think the one commonality among all the people who listen is that they enjoy a good story. And one of the things that I think the podcast does really well is that each one conveys a fun and interesting story. It's always fun to hear somebody's been on a game show. It's always fun to hear somebody's been on more than one. It's always fun to hear somebody's won a lot of money. And so I think in that way, the show works because it's something that people want to hear about.
Yeah, and then just going more into those interviews and stories, because that's sort of the point of the podcast. How many of these do you know about before? Do you have to do a lot of research beforehand, or do you generally know because you're in this space?
I don't know that I have to do a ton of research. Sometimes when I get an application from a guest, they'll include links to the shows that they've been on, and so it's interesting to watch their episodes, and sometimes I'll have questions about their performance on a certain episode of a show that they've been on. Sometimes the guests are considerably older and they've been on shows years ago. Their memories aren't always 100%. And one of the things that I like to let my guests know is that anything you remember or don't remember is fine. It's not this isn't a historical document. This is you reminiscing, and so there is really no wrong answer as long as you're reminiscing. Those guests, I usually know about them because it's more likely that I've reached out to them than they've reached out to me. There are some famous contestants. There was a guy named Tom McKee who had the world record for game show winnings in the 80s on a show called Tic Tac Dough. He won like 88 games in a row, won about $300,000. And he was the record holder until Ken Jennings came along on Jeopardy and just demolished everybody. But he was one that I was incredibly familiar with, that I reached out to. He was more than happy to talk about the experience. And then there are some that I don't really do a ton of research for. And I don't talk about my process too much or very often, but I can almost read the room when it comes to a guest personality. I have a list of questions that I can go to, if there's a lull in the conversation, just to kind of keep the ball in the air. But a lot of the questions that I have just come from a natural curiosity that I have about people. I would say that about 75% of the questions that I ask in the course of an interview are not written down or not prepared. They're just things that I think to ask because I'm fortunate enough to be hosting a podcast about a subject for which I have intense passion and interest. So I'll always have those questions. I'll always be curious to know what somebody's experience was. I'll always be fascinated to know the answer to these things. So a lot of the knowledge of my guests comes from either the process of the conversation or I've done research. I have my buddy Chuck Donegan, who is an archivist. He has something like 35,000 VHS tapes of shows. But if I give him the name of a guest that I have, he'll pull their video resume. So I have that to go off of. Not always necessary, but helpful in some cases for sure.
Nice. And then when you get into these conversations, I know you said about sometimes they forget certain things. How do you get the most out of the guest? Like, are there times when the guest is kind of struggling a little bit, and do you have sort of tactics or strategies that help you sort of get into those stories if they may be a little bit closed off or struggling with the memory?
Well, luckily, I know enough about this stuff that if they're telling a story about a show they've been on and they say the host was, I don't remember his name. He was on something. He was, starts with a B. Like, I'll know usually what that name is, and I can fill in that way.
Yeah.
And when it comes to that struggle, I think I'm pretty good at filling in the gaps. Sometimes I just sort of let it happen. I have this idea that if I were to step in and correct the guest too much, it would sort of erode their confidence that they have in their memory. Because this is something that they've been looking forward to for a couple weeks now, right? They're thinking about how they're going to talk about this. They're digging up old memories, maybe in some cases digging up old photos or memorabilia from the time that they were on a show. They're really hoping that their memory doesn't fail them. And so I think that if I were to correct them too much or correct the dates that they were on or the year, little details like that maybe some of us in the circle care about but the casual listener really doesn't, that it would kind of make them close up. I like to think that I interview with a sense of empathy. I like to think that I'm sharing of myself, and as a result, the guest is sharing of themselves. There's a vulnerability that I think comes about from that type of conversation. I've been on a few shows. I've given my share of stupid answers in my day. And so I can relate in that way. And I think that sort of puts my guests at ease as well.
Definitely, yeah, because I think some podcasters, if they're doing it purely for, like, it's something that their boss has asked them to do or something, and then their heart isn't really in it, then it's going to make it a lot harder than it is for you in this way.
Yeah, definitely. And I would just say listening is so important. Just actively listening. Just because it's your podcast doesn't mean that you have to be the dominant voice.
Yeah.
I have never been shy about giving the wheel to my guest, and if they have a story that they want to tell, as long as it might be, tell it. I'll edit it. It's fine. I want the guests to give all that they have and not feel like they are encroaching on my space. I send them a Zoom link with their name on it. This is your meeting room. This is yours. So I like to not be shy about sharing the spotlight. I think that's very important.
Are there any like particular interviews that just kind of that you're just never going to forget? I'm sure all of them are quite memorable, but do any in particular stand out as just being a really memorable, whether it's for a positive story or more of a negative story? Don't have to go into the full story, but I'm just wondering if there are any that stand out for you.
There is one that absolutely stands out to me.
Yeah.
There was a man named John Hatton. John was a champion on a show that you are probably very familiar with called Blockbusters. I know that the show was on for years and years and years in the UK. It was on for about a year and a half in America in the early 80s. And John was a champion on that show. The rules of Blockbusters at the time were if you win 10 games, you go home. That you're retired as an undefeated champion. And so John won a few games, and I forget which game it was, but in between we'll say game 4 and 5. He learned that his house had burned down in the wildfires that were consuming that area of California at the time. His family was in the audience. They knew that the house had burned down. He didn't. And they chose to not tell him for fear of throwing off his game. So he won a couple more, then found out about the house. The producers told him, you can go home and take care of what you need to take care of. You can come back at any time. And he decided not to do that. He kept playing and won his 10th game. Later, when the show came back, when the show revised their rules and said now it'll be 20 games, they brought him back and he won another 10. He won the maximum amount of money that you could win on that show. To do that in the face of this devastating loss, it was just so inspiring. And I'd be honest, I didn't even know that he would be alive when I went to seek him out for the podcast. He's sharp as ever. He loved talking about the experience. And when he got to the part about talking about his house burning down, he started to tear up. And going back to what I said earlier about only seeing a certain sliver of these contestants' lives through the context of a game show, realizing how much more there is, and making real that emotion that he must have felt 40, 50 years ago. It's never really felt more real to me than that interview. That was one that I will never forget. I made him a CD of it and a transcript, and I mailed it to him. And we've been talking ever since. That's a cherished friendship for sure. That's come about just because of this show.
That's incredible. I can imagine, like, if I was doing an interview like that, it would just send me. Like, if the guest was telling that story and they were tearing up and everything, that would be
Yeah.
that's a tough position as an interviewer as well.
It was tough. I would say that that's when listening came into play in such a huge way. When you get a moment like that, don't talk over it. Just let it sit, and I'll be honest, that like 8 seconds of silence once he realizes those emotions are coming back, I think I'm prouder of those 8 seconds of just the emotion that's conveyed through that silence than I am about most of the stuff that I've done. Just that moment right there, to be able to make a listener feel something through their headphones, through their speaker, that's what this is about. That's the goal, I think, of podcasting, is to make somebody feel something.
And as an audio guy, it makes me think of sort of certain little things that separate good editors from kind of average editors. Some editors may feel they have to cut out every single piece of dead air, but that is obviously a space to be left in as silent at full 8 seconds, I think, on.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's like music, and if you're listening, and you have your wits about you, you know that there's something being conveyed by that silence. You know that it's not an error. I've never really been a big believer in extensive editing. One of the things that I used to do with my initial podcast was Stranger Than Christian. Every conversation was unedited. Some episodes were 40 minutes long. I think my longest was about 3 hours. And I left in I just left that in. As I say, I make no pretenses about the fact that this is a show that I do from home and that I'm a regular human being talking to other regular human beings. So it seems pretentious to me to ultra process my audio and make it sound too smooth. I think that there's romance in the roughness of conversation, and even the fact that I record audio only. I don't even do video because I used to love the romance of like a phone conversation. That's the thing that doesn't happen very often unless it's with a family member or you're on hold for an hour. You're not usually on the phone for that long. And as a result, I think that there is, again, a vulnerability that arises from that type of communication when you're not worried about how your face looks. You're not worried about how your background looks. You're just there to talk. I think that that's a whole different flavor of conversation. And that's something that for me originated with that first podcast, but to a certain degree, it's something that I like to extend into this current project as well.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I think, especially for story-driven, learning about the history of a guest, things like that, the lack of editing. I think for certain podcasts, if it's like quick tips for people for business when they're on their commute, then more editing might be needed just to get as much sort of in as possible. But yeah, for emotional stories like this, I can see why you went down that route. And
Sure.
And then just a couple more things before we close out. A lot of people listening, they want to know how to grow their podcast, and it's interesting to hear how people have done it. So for you, when you first started this, what were the main ways that you got the word out? I know you had your blog already, which must have helped.
Yes, when it came time to do this podcast, it definitely helped to have Buzzerblog, to have that main hub for all that information. That was the first place that we advertised the show. That's where we started looking for guests. That was incredibly helpful. I found a lot of message boards that catered to the interests of people who love game shows, and so I cross-posted there. Also asked for guests there. I had a Google form that I would send to anyone who was interested in being on the show, and that's how I got my guests. So any post about the show in the lead up to its premiere included that link. So by the time I hit the ground, by the time I started the show in November of 22, I already had like 8 episodes in the can, which was a great place to be, especially during the holidays, to have that all sort of scheduled out and edited and produced sort of in advance. I just spread the word anywhere I could. Message boards were incredibly helpful. Reddit was incredibly helpful. Facebook groups. I joined a bunch. I flooded my own inbox with spam for a month, but it was worth it because again, that information just got out to as many potentially interested, like-minded people as possible. And then from there, you really just hope that word of mouth spreads. You hope that what you're doing is something that resonates with people, something that people enjoy listening to. They tell a friend, that friend tells a friend, that friend tells a friend. A lot of my growth has been organic. We haven't really advertised outside of our own space. So proud of that as well. And we have a captive audience. The game show lovers out there are passionate and detail oriented, and they love hearing stories, and they love hearing about winnings, and they love hearing about people's experiences. Most of these fans have never been on a show. That's a whole separate world for them. And so I like to think that we do our best to bridge that gap.
With the groups, I think depending on the niche, there can be quite a lot of friction there. If you start posting about your podcast, then you'll get kicked out for self-promotion.
Oh, certainly. Always ask permission. Luckily, it's a different situation for me because at that point I had already been writing for Buzzer Blog for years. I've already had my game show experiences. Most of them had come at that time. And so my reputation sort of preceded myself in that way, where it was a little easier for me to message the moderators of a group and say, "Hey, I'm Christian Carrion from Buzzer Blog, looking to do this podcast. Could I post whatever?" I got permission for every post. Always do that. Never just jump in a group and start spamming your links without permission. And I realize other people don't have it that easy, but I think that again that can be remedied. I think in most instances by being candid and just being a person and just asking. The worst they could say is no.
Yeah, and I'm sure most people listening, they've got some link to whatever niche they're podcasting on, or a link to somebody else within that niche that they can use to sort of build that authority first and build a kind of a reputation for being helpful within that group before they start sharing things, if they don't already have
definitely
what you had.
Yeah, for sure. And I would also say that I would never let promotion be a barrier to keep me from doing my podcast.
Yeah.
If nobody let me post that link, I would figure out how to find guests. I would figure out how to do it on my own. You never let that stop you from making the stuff. That's one thing that I wish I had. That's one thing I wish I had known earlier in this process. Not to take yourself too seriously, and just to do it. Just do it. Don't worry about the quality of your microphone. Don't worry about, sound quality is important, but if it's going to be a barrier between you and the story that you want to tell or what you want to convey, screw it. Just put it out there. Just do it and hope that people will enjoy listening to it. I put out unedited audio for 2 years, and I like to think I have the beginnings of a little career here just on the back of that. So it's really, it's just a matter of doing it.
Awesome. I think that's a good place to round this out with Just Do It. So I really appreciate that, Christian. Some really interesting stories, very unique podcast. So if anybody wants to have a listen, anyone who's a fan of game shows in general, or just wants to hear some of these fascinating stories, is it buzzerblog.com/tell us that they can go to? And also obviously it's on all the podcast platforms.
Correct. Yeah, buzzerblog.com/tell us. It's on all the major streaming services. Also, it's streaming 24/7 at tuay.stream.
Awesome. Okay, I'll make sure we get those links in the show notes as well. Well, thanks again, Christian.
Wonderful.
That was really helpful.
It was my pleasure. I love talking about this kind of stuff. Thank you for facilitating this.
No, it's my pleasure getting a little bit behind the scenes there, because it interests me as well as someone who's used to watch a lot of game shows growing up as well.
Wonderful. Which ones?
Used to watch Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and Weakest Link. My parents always used to watch University Challenge, but that one was I could never get any of the questions back then, so...
Yeah. Oh, even to this day, I don't get anything right. University Challenge. That's an incredibly difficult show. Weakest Link was fun. Weakest Link and Millionaire came about at a time in my life when that was like the second chapter. All game shows started coming back, and Millionaire started it, and Weakest Link kind of came second. So that's a whole era for me that I was fascinated with. It's really cool to hear.
Nice. Cool. All right. Thanks again, Christian.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.